All right, guys, we're back with another episode. So, last week we actually started doing episodes where we interview each other. I think, Rishi and I have been friends for years now, and I always learn so much from him. And I hope he learned something
A lot.
from me as well.
I just learned something from you in the episode we completed 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. So today, like last week we all, Rishi interviewed me about reviews mining. Today, it's all about copywriting and the king of CRO copywriting. So now, before we get started, one of the questions I had, when I talked to Rishi a few months ago is, how the hell did you get into copywriting?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I should mention that, I am a student of copywriting. I'm actually not a very good copywriter, but I have an interesting story and
bullshit.
I have an interesting story, and I think, I think maybe this would connect with some of the readers. So I got into copywriting. Really, I would say that the thing that really kind of got me into copywriting was I was working for a creative agency, and I just joined the company, and there were three founders, and one of the founders was telling me that they had just completed a $2 million project, a rebranding project for I think it was like a real estate company. Mm-hmm. And my question was that I was like, oh my God, that's really amazing. And it was like a very comprehensive project and had lots of these like fancy interactive map interface and stuff like that. Really, it was really cool. And one of the questions I asked was, I was like, are they going to make more money, or have they made more money after they launched it? And he said, well, we are actually going to be working on adding some tracking, but it's actually not part of the project. It wasn't part of the scope, the client just wanted to rebrand. And I thought to myself, like, wait, how? I don't understand. Like, if a business is having a website, especially if it's a commercial business, then it must somehow tie to revenue. And, the point was that the client had not requested this. And so I thought to myself that, how long is this going to go on? Like, at what point I see the world changing. I don't see the world like, I remember when I started off, clients used to say, I want a brochure website, that was the thing, but we had matured since then. And I just felt that, like, hey, look, this is not going to work. And so that was my first kind of insight into this idea, like, I, as a marketer, or as not even as a marketer, but as a business person, want to know that my $2 million rebrand exercise led to more revenue, 10 million in revenue or something, and go ahead.
Yeah, no, so you didn't think like, oh, I should get into like branding so I don't have to show results to clients and it would be easier.
No, I thought that if I can somehow show results, because we were in a situation where we were telling the client that, well, if the client didn't expect us to show ROI, and so that was fine. But I thought, if I can somehow show ROI, I can make a lot more money. So that was my motivation. So that was like the first time I kind of became aware of this phenomena where there is more people expect accountability from marketing. We know about the Mad Men kind of whole idea where we say, 50% of advertising works, but we just don't know what 50%. And I just felt like that phenomena was shifting, right? And so that was one. And I was in sales at that point. I was heading sales, and so not at all into copywriting. And then from there, I went work for another agency. So I failed here. Then I went to work for another agency.
So as soon as you told them, guys, we need to show results, they're like, okay, Rishi, this is not our business. We don't show results.
Well, no. It was a whole bunch of things. But I mean, I was trying to figure out I think most of our life we're trying to, especially early on in our career, and I would encourage everyone to do this, is that get into uncomfortable situations. I'd never manage sales, run sales for an organization. And so but I was curious about, I was only, for me, what I loved, even though I have no background in sales, I'm an engineer. I really loved the accountability aspect. Like one of the things that I always found very interesting, and I remember thinking about this when I would have a job, is I would say like every month I get a fixed salary, but some months I do more work and some months I do less work. And some months I'm, like, why am I getting the fixed salary? I was like, I just felt very uncomfortable with that idea. And I always thought like it'd be very interesting if what I make is directly proportional to the effort I'm putting in. And sales was the way to do that. And so that's kind of how that happened. But the thing, of course, is that you can also fail a lot. And I failed in sales. I also fail a lot in experimentation. So, I think we need to start embracing the idea that most ideas don't actually work out. But anyway, that was my first thing. And then I worked for another company. And over there, I discovered infomercials. And I was like, what the hell am I looking at?
But did you discover them as a marketer? Or because infomercials are probably from, I don't know, the 60s?
Yeah.
So like, tell me about, like, was it like one day I was like, oh, infomercials, like, how did you discover them?
Exactly. I mean, for me, I came to the US in 2002. So I had no cultural context about anything else. And so when I came to the university, I didn't even have a TV. So I I didn't know what an infomercial was. I'd never been exposed to it. But then I started like noticing these like really over the top, like advertisements. And it was very interesting for me because I was always working for digital agencies that were in the really, really high end of design. And so it was almost like I was like cheating. I have a beautiful wife and I'm like cheating and saying like, what's happening on the other end of the thing? And so I was really interested in this, like I'd been taught through the work that we'd done, because the companies that I worked for had done work for like the biggest brands in the world. And, these brands had like really beautiful, pristine websites and user experience. And here I am looking at an infomercial that is like breaking all these rules of traditional marketing. And I was like, why are these idiots doing this stupid thing? Like, who's buying this? And I obviously dismissed it. I was curious. It was like almost like a freak show, and I was enjoying it for the entertainment value. And I thought like, okay, well, obviously no one's going to buy this. Like this crazy guy is trying to sell like OxyClean, and like he's like screaming at me, and he's like, or that ShamWow. And people would actually make fun of these things. Like, there was this ointment you would put in your head, and the idea was like, I forget the name of the brand, but it was like just put in the commercial. Literally was like apply directly to the head. Literally, they would say this like every 4 seconds, apply directly to the head. And people started making parody videos where they would take a banana and just apply directly to the head. And they, so I thought like, okay, obviously these guys aren't making money. And so I just didn't understand the phenomena. And of course, then it was also playing late at night. So I'm like, who the hell is watching this? Like, what is going on over here? And then I remember reading an article that said Bowflex was making $1 billion a year through infomercials, direct selling their workout equipment through infomercials. And that's when I said, wait a minute, something doesn't add up over here. So we've got these two problems. One is that I'm working in a branded world where we're saying there is no ROI. There's no way to measure it. And then we have infomercials that is nothing but measurement. And I thought to myself like, okay, wait a minute. So there's going to be, so anyways, that was my original kind of aha moment, that wait a minute, we have to somehow figure out a way to demonstrate that our marketing is directly moving product, and get away from this idea of like, it's helping brand recall. What the hell does that even mean? So anyway, that was my first step in this journey 13 years ago.
And then how did you feel when you discovered that one of your favorite, copywriters of all time, Joe Sugarman, his book is kind of like something that you mentioned to me a few times. You read it multiple times. How did you feel when you found out that he was also into infomercials? By the way,
I loved it. I felt I'd found a tribe. Like I found my people, and so yeah, if I've discovered, I know one of the things I really admire about Lorenzo is that he has encyclopedic knowledge about a whole bunch of different things. And he knows about all direct response copywriters. I actually haven't read many of them, and actually the many of the books that I've read, I actually didn't like. I think ultimately they are all communicating the same powerful idea. I think different authors describe it differently. So, there is nothing that Joseph Sugarman has talked about in his direct response book that other direct response books don't talk about, but I just liked the way he described it. I felt it was like I could relate to him a lot. And so that's why the book resonated with me. But
one of the things about his book that actually surprised me the most was actually learning that he sold a private jet for hundreds of thousands of dollars via direct mail back in like the 70s or the 80s, right?
That's right.
Like, that was crazy. I was like, what? You can sell private jets through direct mail?
Well, what I loved about him was, one of the things I really admired about him was that, and I think a lot of the great copywriters actually do this, is that he had skin in the game. So like he had his own catalog. So he would literally he was basically an entrepreneur who was using his copywriting skills to sell product. And, I mean, what is really fascinating about, and we could talk about Joseph Sugarman for forever, but I mean, just like there are simple things that he said. Like there was one thing that really kind of stood out to me. So one of his blockbuster products was blue blocker
glasses.
And what he did was, I thought it was so genius. I'm most interested in understanding human behavior. And the thing is that if I hadn't been in CRO or marketing, I could have been a social worker, or I could have been a politician. Like, I think every job requires you to understand other human beings. And some jobs require you to understand it more. CRO, I think, requires you to be empathetic, but I think a social worker and a politician, all of these people are also like really, really kind of tuned into that attribute. So I would 100% have been in one of those fields. But what I thought Lorenzo was very curious about, and I don't want to get too much into the tangent, but I'll just mention this one point. So one would assume, so the blue blocker glasses, the idea was you put on these glasses and it blocks out certain lights, I think blue, and so it helps with the clarity of seeing. And one would assume that if you're making a commercial for that product, the first thing you would do is you would actually show a before and after. So like you'd kind of like show an image without it and then maybe show the thing with it. He didn't do that. He did exactly the opposite. He would walk up to people and he would say, put on these glasses in a sunny day, put on these glasses, and he would record their reactions. But he never showed how it would actually look like if you saw through it. And I just thought it was a genius insight.
Yeah.
And so his basic pitch was, he didn't say it, but it was like, in order to see it, you have to order it. And, they sold, I think they sold like 30 million pairs or something, crazy numbers. Yeah. But
there was another thing, I think it was like a watch that he sold millions of wheels. You want to tell that story of the watch? Because I barely remember it.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, because he's done something that you do as well when you start working with clients, right? He would interview Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so the watch thing is really amazing, is that he was selling a digital, and again, we were talking about in the 70s. So he's selling a digital watch like I have, and he doesn't know anything about watches. And one of the things he talks about is that as a copywriter, as a direct response copywriter, you actually have to have good broad knowledge. So you can actually kind of like talk about various topics. And I think that's a really important skill. You also need to be incredibly curious. So he knew a little bit about watches, but he didn't know all the technical details. So when the client said, I want you to sell my Casio watch, I don't remember what it was, but the detail was, I'm trying to remember now.
He went to talk to like a bunch of manufacturing company to understand.
Yeah, he went to the actual that's right. And one of the things that they talked about was, I think, I'm trying to remember now, there were two attributes. One was the gold plated aspect, like they would have these connectors out of gold plating. And when he kind of like was like, oh my God, this is like, or maybe it was like a laser etching. There was something they were doing specifically. And I apologize, I'm not fully prepared for that example, but there was something they were doing with the laser etching. But when he kind of heard that, he told the engineer, he's like, this is like an incredible feature. And the engineer looked at him and said, dude, every watch has that feature.
Exactly.
And his thing was like, Yes, but the consumer doesn't know that.
Nobody talks about it.
So his headline was, I think it was like a laser watch or something. I forget now what the exact thing was. But again, this is a really important. Sometimes actually, Mike, when I do the interrogation with clients, they'll sometimes say like, Rishi, there's nothing proprietary about my product. There's nothing unique about my product. And I asked them like, okay, what are your sales like? Oh, we do 20 million in sales. I'm like, dude, like there's a reason why people are buying your product. So we have to like reverse engineer to understand what that is. And so, yes, all of that technique I've copied and taken from Joe Sugarman.
I found the actually ad that he wrote. I'll put it in the show notes.
I can actually, okay. Okay.
It says laser beam digital watch. Jeez.
Yeah, I wish I actually, you know what? If you send
I'll share my screen. I'll share my screen.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh my God. There we go.
There we go.
There we go. Wonderful.
Never press another button day or night with America's first digital watch that glows in the dark.
It's genius. It's genius. And just look at how much copy is there on this page. And when I hear like modern, like modern, e-commerce kind of bros talking about the fact that nobody reads copy. I think something is to be said about the copy. And if you look at the bottom, if you look at your screen real quick, I'll just mention one thing and then we can kind of move on. But if you look at the bottom right,
call to action.
Well, no, right at the bottom said JS&A. That's his company. So he's literally got skin in the game. Versus like just being a hired person. All right, cool. Thank you for that.
Cool. So you and I, few days ago, actually, you told me this sentence that I'm about to say that, of course, triggered my curiosity. You said there's a big difference between being a copywriter and being a CRO copywriter. And then I was like, okay, I'm a CRO guy and I know a little bit of copywriting, even though I'm not a copywriter. I'm like, can you tell me this? Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some of these answers are, I'm just going to try to give the best answer I can. So when I think about being first of all, when I think about the traditional definition of a copywriter, that is a whole different animal, right? So we have a brand that says, we've got this new product. We want to come up with interesting ways. I mean, the way I look at copywriting typically is in advertising. So advertising copywriting, and what we are doing is much different. But even if you look at direct response copywriting, I still think that a CRO copywriter is still quite different, because the indirect response copywriting, there is still like when I think about Joseph Sugarman's ads and stuff like that, I mean, like, yes, he was A/B testing, but I mean, we're talking about like pretty clunky A/B testing, and he would have to put out an ad, spend thousands of dollars, and then he would split the traffic and see what worked well. But with CRO copywriting, like it's a whole different mindset, and I can test different selling angles at scale. And so like when I think about it just from a functional perspective, I feel like I have so many more tools available to me as a CRO copywriter. So I think that from that perspective, I think it's a completely different thing. And that it just turns out that having all those tools and being able to iterate so fast actually leads you to different outputs, versus, I can do one experiment every couple of weeks, right? And I think from that perspective, I think it's totally different.
Do you see an opportunity for copywriters to become like why are you smiling?
No, go on.
For copywriters to become CRO copywriters, because it's like less competitive market?
I think if copywriters realize that getting into the CRO copywriting, CRO space, forget about CRO copywriting, they get into the CRO space, it is game over for most CROs. I absolutely think that there's $1 billion opportunity for traditional copywriters, and there are lots of them that are there that are really, really good, to kind of just like basically say that, you know, we're gonna come after the CRO space. And I think that a UI UX person in the CRO space is hugely at a disadvantage compared to versus if they were competing against copywriter who came to the CRO space. So that's my take.
Yeah, you and I discuss about these kind of topics all the time. You know, we used to have monthly catch up. Now we have almost like daily catch up, I would say. And I would say that both you and I agree on one thing. The green field for a CRO person nowadays is copywriting CRO. But the problem with that is it's true that there's green field because, you know, analytics CRO, there's a lot of people in there. UX CRO, there's a lot of people in there. The problem with copywriting being a green field is also that it's so freaking difficult to become a copy focused CRO person, because it would require really, really crazy amount of years becoming super, super good at copy. While with analytics, sure, you know, I'm not saying analytics or UX are super easy. Absolutely not. I'm not claiming that. But becoming a very good copywriting focused CRO is definitely more difficult.
You know, the thing I would mention here for the people that are listening that are one of the big mistakes. This is the biggest reason why CROs don't get into copywriting, and this is the reason why many marketers don't get into copywriting, is they somehow confuse copywriting with language skills. Like this person can write a well-structured English language or has a degree in English, and I don't. You know, I don't have a degree in English. And my writing
English is not even your first language.
It's not. And in fact, 55% of my LinkedIn posts have gross typographical errors. The thing is that I'm in the business of understanding the psychology of the buyer and then figuring out a way to communicate back to that buyer. And so I'm really focused on the strategy of copywriting versus the art of copywriting. So there's a distinction here. And I think it's really important for marketers to understand that distinction and not limit yourself to say, well, I'm not qualified for the art of copywriting because there are these other people in my team that are much better writers than I am. It has nothing to do with writing. It has everything to do with identifying unexplored. That's the key thing, is that it's unexplored selling angles. And if you can kind of look at a problem and look at the competitors and say, okay, everyone's kind of zigging, I'm going to zag in this very specific way. You'll just, even with typographic, first of all, the only person who notices typographical errors is your manager. The consumer is not sitting on a website and saying, you know, there's a wrong comma here or wrong period here. Most people don't even have the you know, I think they say you should write to sixth grade level. That's not the thing that makes the difference.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I wanted to ask you, Rishi, you and I spoke about this a lot of times. You know, you've been in the CRO copywriting game for 13, 14 years, and pretty much like a masterpiece, you've been shaping your process throughout all this, like, you know, crazy amount of years that you've been in CRO. Can you spend not too much time, because probably it's not the right moment, but can you spend like 2-3 minutes kind of like breaking down the very oiled process that you have made absolutely perfect throughout the years, so everybody is aware of it?
Yeah. So basically, and I'll give the short version of this, is that, you know, we are, you know, I think that we need to like really fixate and laser focus on a few key attributes. The human mind is a very complex machine, and there's a whole bunch of motivations that people have if they're buying a condom brand versus if they're buying a tennis ball. I get that, but one of the things that I've been focused on is what are the common elements that apply broadly, and also what apply to a first-time buyer. That's the lens through which I look at conversion optimization. So in that process, we've been able to identify 9 key attributes. Now, of course, there are many, many more attributes, but there are 9 attributes that we zero in on. And some of them I'll just mention briefly here. The rest of them are, anyone who follows me, and you can write a comment and I'll send you a link for a blog article that explains all 9. But some of the ones that I find very interesting is one of them is point number 6, which is people need motivation to break habits. This is a really, where you can, if you describe a product and you describe it in a beautiful way, but you don't give the buyer a path to go from where they are right now to actually having the product in their home, then you failed. It's pointless. So that we realized that was one of the things that we had to communicate in our copywriting. So that's one of the techniques. One of the other ones that I'm a big fan of is to demonstrating expertise. Typically, I'm not working with fashion brands. I'm working with products that, even if you're working with a fashion brand, the same principles apply. The consumer, when I think about, like, for example, when I think about, like, why would I listen to Lorenzo's approach to reviews mining? Because he spent 10,000 hours thinking about it. So there is this effort and expertise that makes me drawn to that solution. The same is true for people that are on our website. So if we cannot dramatize, or if you cannot demonstrate expertise, then all you are is a reseller. And if you're selling, and so I think that those 2 are the most important, but there are 7 other ones, and we won't get into that right now, but that's a very specific process we use, and we never deviate away from it. So we always, like, and Lorenzo knows this, every example, and in our episodes, you'll notice that if I see a price point, I will do price justification. If I see a description, it will always talk about expertise on our end. So I'll kind of use the same technique over and over again. So those are the 9 that I focus on.
Yeah, I will put a link in the comments below to the page in your website where you describe the whole process. I believe you also have a video that explains step by step how to do it.
Yeah.
So check it out. Now I want to go from kind of like theory of the process into a little bit of practice. So now imagine you're in front of, I don't know, do you use Google Doc to? Yeah. So you're in front of Google Doc, ready to write, ready to create a task for a client. What do? Walk me through it. Like literally in front of a white paper.
Yeah. So, I mean, so actually, the process has matured quite a bit for us. So we actually have like a 4-step process. And so each step, so we actually have a template, and I'm happy to share that template, by the way, for anyone who's interested. But we have a template where for step 1, we have a bunch of like 14 steps, and we have to go through all 14 steps. But I can just give you the basic outline. The first thing we do is deconstruction. If you go to some of our older episodes, you'll see we've talked about deconstruction. So deconstruction is one of the important steps in step 1. Then what happens is that when you're doing deconstruction, which is basically us looking at every element on the page, it naturally leads to questions. And one of my techniques, and we're not going to cover it in this episode, but I'm not a big fan of user research. I'm not capable of doing good research. Lorenzo's, of course, that's his area. But my point is that I still want to walk in the shoes of the buyer. So what I do is when I'm doing the deconstruction, I'm thinking about all the kinds of questions that are floating through my mind. I'm paying a lot of attention to all the negative questions that are floating in my mind, and I note all of them down. And like sometimes even simple things like when I read a description and I feel like this is not impressive, I actually note it down and I actually send it to the client. So this is part of step 1 itself. We do client interrogation where we are sending the client a bunch of questions, and we literally say something like, you have this very prominent line on the product description. Why the hell would I care about it? What's so special about this? We're putting the client in this very uncomfortable position of having to explain their thing, because and sometimes I get pushback, but my reasoning for that is that the consumer is having the same question. So going back to Lorenzo's question about the process, so literally if I was sitting with a blank sheet, I would would open up our template, step one, and I would start off with deconstruction. I would then note down questions for the client interrogation. And there are a few other steps in step one itself. And then we're done with step one. And then we have this one thing I should just mention very quickly is we have this idea of a gestation period. So we like to always give a break of 24 hours. And then we want to do step two after that, because even with Beard Brand, after talking to, this is an analysis we did recently, but after doing my part, when I spoke to Lorenzo, I had a whole different set of ideas. So giving yourself a gap, it really helps.
One thing that I really want to put the reader into, like the listener, to understand what the deconstruction is. In fact, we'll put that an example of a deconstruction that you recently have done for an episode we just finished recording. But the best way to think about it is, if Rishi look at the page with a microscope and almost like looked at every single pixel of that page to understand what's going on in that page. And as a great doctor, right, we need to first understand what the situation of, the patient is before coming up with the right medicine to give, right? I remember when you first showed me that approach, I was like, damn, I kind of have done deconstruction in my brain every time I would analyze a page, but I've never even thought about the idea of actually using a kind of like a dot to actually, because that reminded me of, like, the other day I went to the dermatologist to basically like analyze all my birthmarks and so on, and he kind of like identified some birthmarks that might have a little bit more attention and so on. So like, I've never even thought about actually marking every single element of a page. So I thought it was like very, very clever and genius, but of course, it was something that was coming from you, so what was not very surprising.
Please. Actually, the idea of, I should just mention this, I should give credit where credit's due. The idea of deconstruction, the annotation part, actually came from my wife, who is not a marketer, who is not at all involved. And one day I was just telling her about this problem I was having of making my team follow a set process. She's like, why don't you just like annotate everything? I was like, sort it.
I love it. So one thing you said earlier about the research, you said that, research is not your game. You previously stated a lot of other times publicly on podcast. I think you even have a video about, here's why I don't do research. Here's why I'm not a big fan of it. So my question to you is, how the hell are you able to develop empathy towards every single user, especially like super early on when you start working on a project, you have zero knowledge whatsoever towards the business? How do you do that?
So, I think it's a great question. And I think some people might, and I'm now realizing that, when I say I don't do user research, first of all, I've stopped saying I don't do research. I don't do user research and I specifically don't do research of people that are buying the product, but I'm certainly doing research in terms of talking to the client, right? So I think that some people feel that, oh, wait a minute, you're kind of like, it's clickbait where you're saying, so I guess I should clarify, I'm talking about user research. So how do I develop empathy? So there are a couple of things that I do. One of them is just the way my brain is wired, which is that literally I am the most blind person on a website. Like if researchers were looking at how I navigate a website, they'll be like, idiot, are you not seeing anything? Because I literally can't, I'm confused by everything. Everything confuses me. So I've taken this extreme weakness and actually made it a strength. Because when I look at a page, I can feel the frustration and the anxiety of the most confused shopper, which is actually a skill that you need as a CRO. That's number one. The other thing is that I've been able to, over the years, hone in on a very specific use case, which is first-time buyers. I don't think my approach would work at all if a client said, I want to increase my average order value, or if I want to do cross sells. I don't know. I never even do those things because that's not the muscle I've worked on. But when it comes to converting first-time buyers, it turns out that the same movie plays out over and over again. So Lorenzo knows this as well from his research, that for a first-time buyer, the price point is a sticker shock no matter what your price point is. So I know that that's a point of friction. For a first-time buyer, they're thinking about like, I already have a workaround for the solution, whatever it is. I don't want to, why should I fire that? Like, these are the same questions, whether you're selling a Peloton bike or you're selling a makeup kit. If you're a first-time buyer, those are the same questions you're having. So that is how I'm able to essentially kind of bypass the user research phase, because I'm like really laser focused on those very limited use cases.
So one question I have in regards to the definition of first-time buyer, because I think it's actually something that is quite underutilized as a thought. For you, first-time buyer is somebody that has never bought that product in their life before, or somebody that has never bought the product of that company before? Because those two are two different use cases, right?
Yeah. So I think my I would say the primary focus is someone who has never bought from that company before, but I would say there's a very strong overlap typically between those two. Yeah.
Cool. Last thing before we end the chat, I have to say that, I confessed a few times that the first time I came across, you online was in 2010. Remember the story?
Yeah, you've told me.
Yeah, I basically like literally Googled top CRO blog, and I think it was a blog post from Invesp, right? Am I right?
No, I don't think so. I had a better retail WordPress blog, I think.
Yeah. But it was like a listicle article.
I see.
With the top 10 CRO blogs.
Got it.
From Invesp, I think it was an article.
Yeah, it was either Invesp or it could have been Linda from, what was that? Get Elastic. I think they also compile those things.
And your blog was in that list. Right. I remember when I clicked through, I was like, who is this dude? Like, the kind of stuff that you were talking about back then, nobody, like, not even now, the kind of stuff that you talk about in your blog, nobody ever talks about. And I remember when again, 12 years ago, when I started reading through all your articles, I'm like, I've never seen any blogger, because back then I was thinking you were a blogger. I've never seen anybody making this kind of like thinking about CRO. I was reading CXL blog and other blogs, CRE blog, and so on. And the first kind of thought I had back then was like, how does this guy come up with so many super creative ideas that other CRO people, or in general, other marketers, don't really come up with? So how, like, you're a super creative guy. Like, is it something that you have since, you came out of your mom's belly, or have you been able to develop, like, have you worked on that creative muscle? Like, just tell us more about this, because I want to suck up all the knowledge about the creativity you have.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm a particularly creative person or anything of that kind. I think there are a couple of things that work to my benefit. Or I was not traditionally trained in marketing. I never had a situation where I was, worked in a company where I was given the basic building blocks of how a marketing campaign is structured. And I really am grateful that didn't happen, because I think it would have killed my creative thinking. So I just was sitting in a room thinking like, this is how it's done. And later on, I realized that after the ideas had already formed in my head, that's when I realized that, oh, actually nobody else is thinking this way, or not nobody else, but I didn't know any better. My blog was just me kind of like typing out thoughts that I was having, the one skill that I have is that, and it's kind of, I'm kind of like Amazon in this. Amazon has this really, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to have this really interesting, Amazon is like, in terms of like mental models, I think they have the most interesting set of mental models. And one of the ones that I had heard about was that their philosophy is that don't pursue anything new unless if you're willing to continue investing in it for 5 years. And so that became a mental model. So if someone in their team said, like, hey, we should think about this idea, the manager would say, are we willing to continue to go down the path of 5 years? And the answer is not really. Then they're like, let's not even talk about it. So that really, that thought process really kind of, and even before I did that, I always had that. So when I'm curious, I always like think about problems that I'll be interested in for a long period of time. Like, I don't think that I will ever lose interest in understanding how a consumer walks into a store and buys a home security system when they've never bought a home security. Like, I'm really curious about that. I don't care if someone's paying me for it or not. I'll just think about it anyway. So excuse me. So I'm very persistent about those kind of like problems. And so when I think the only advantage I have over some other people is that I think about that problem for it's just sheer amount of time I put thinking about that one thing. And because I'm really curious about it. And so I think that might explain it.
Yeah, so I want to unpack a little bit what you just said. When you say I spend a lot of time thinking about that problem, in private conversations we had, you and I, you said, oh, sometimes like every morning when I'm in my hometown, because right now you're in Florida, you little bastard. You told me, oh, I would go on walks, and on those walks I would think a lot, right, about problems that maybe like my clients have and so on. I would love for you to kind of like show us what for you thinking about a problem really means. Like when you say, oh, I've been thinking a lot about this problem. Okay, like, do you have a process that you go through when you think about a problem, or what are the questions that you ask yourself when you think about the problem?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's difficult. I know.
I don't think I have a specific, I don't know what the answer is, but I think one of the things that has always been useful to me personally, and the way I can able to think about problems, is that I keep very few. This is actually becoming more of a problem now. It wasn't a problem before, but previously I would only store a few ideas in my mind. I think a lot of people have a lot of ideas in their mind. And when you have like 20 ideas in your mind, it's very difficult to actually think on any one thing. I would just have like 3 ideas in my mind, and so I would take one big problem. And one of the other tricks is, so I don't think there's anything special in terms of how I think about stuff. I think what's special is how many items I put in the mental container, and I put very few items. And I think when you just have 3 ideas, you just naturally, you naturally think about it. So I think that's my trick.
Cool, Rishi. Thank you so much for this chat. As always, every time I talk to you, I get excited at the end, and I learned like crazy. We should say that we have a bunch of other episodes all related to interviewing each other.
Yeah.
Coming up, we have one about jobs to be done. We have one more about buyer psychology and so on. If you guys want any other specific type of like kind of episode, if you want us to go drill down into one or more topics, just write them down in the comments, and we'll do our best to organize it.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. And we'll do a lot more formats. In fact, one thing I'll just end with is that I thought about this yesterday, Lorenzo, that there is somebody from the CRO space, which I guarantee nobody listening to our videos knows about this person, but he's been very, very, very beneficial, very, very influential in my life. And I know that you admire him as well. So we're in I'm actually going to reach out and see if we can actually bring him on one of our shows. So anyway, so I'm excited about more interviews, and this time Lorenzo and I will be interviewing him. So
I like this cliffhanger technique. As a copywriter, I wouldn't expect less from you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for your time today. And I look forward to doing more episodes with you.
Thank you, guys. Ciao.